Hello and welcome to video number 7 of our music education series. Today we're going to talk about the final segment of the responding category in the Georgia Standards. This section is evaluating music and music performances. Now, this section is probably something that I don't think about as often. I think a lot about students creating music and performing music and even responding to music, but I don't think a ton about them intentionally taking the time to evaluate other people's music or performances. But it's an important skill that students need to have. It will make students a lot more self-aware of the music and created things that they put forth if they have practiced evaluating and assessing and almost grading, in a way, other people's work. It isn't intended to be equipping students to critique necessarily in a negative way, but it will help them to strive for excellence. So we're going to take a look at the individual standards and kind of talk through how those can be applied in the day-to-day music classroom. The very first subpoint is collaboratively develop criteria for evaluation of music and music performances. So I think the most important thing here is the collaborative aspect. Students should work together to critique and encourage other students in their music making. So this could look like the class together deciding on 5 criteria that make a music performance great. This could be stylistic accuracy. This could be use of dynamics. This could be use of hard technical virtuosic playing, or any of these categories. It could be anything. So you could allow the students at the beginning of the class period to actually come up with those criteria on their own, work together as a group, offer different suggestions, and then let them use those criteria that they have come up with to actually grade a music performance. So you could do this a number of different ways. You could either have a video up on YouTube of a music performance and tell the students ahead of time what kind of music, what instruments, or what sort of music is going to be performed so that they can build those criteria around that. Or you could have them do this exercise on each other, which would be uniquely bonding and also encourage students to perform really well and do their best effort. It would also teach encouragement and building one another up instead of being overly critical or tearing down the performer. This can be really helpful for students if they're giving feedback to live people who are in the room, who are their classmates, friends, and peers. It's much more relatable to think about receiving that critique than if you're watching the person who sits next to you receive it. But with that being said, it would need to be very closely monitored because you don't want students to be afraid to come back to music class or afraid to perform for their classmates because harsh feedback is being given in the music classroom. So if you did this, you would probably want the students to develop criteria, but you would also want guidelines. So maybe saying 2 positive things before 1 negative thing, or very specific vocabulary and wording and phrasing, such as things that can be improved on, not things that were done badly. It's really important to be super intentional about feedback for students because bad feedback or hurtful feedback can really damage a student's just performance anxiety and desire to participate in music. So that's really important to shape. The next subpoint is to use developed criteria to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of their own and others' performances, compositions, and arrangements, and to implement constructive suggestions for improvement. So a lot of this is what we just talked about. The criteria needs to talk through not just the quality and the goodness of the musical performance, but also the effectiveness. Was the style accurately portrayed? Was the goal of the piece being written met when the performer performed? And this this subpoint also talks about constructive suggestions for improvement rather than beating someone down. So this also is talking about performances, compositions, and arrangements. So that's important to note. It's not just a performance of Vivaldi. It is new musical work, new musical arrangements, and compositions. And that can be really encouraging to students who are young composers to hear feedback and see that their music is just as worthy of being evaluated and assessed as Beethoven's. The next one is really fun. The next one is explaining personal preferences for specific musical works using appropriate vocabulary. So this can be applied a number of different ways. You can do this using a discussion time with your class. You can ask students to tell you how they feel about music. You can have students write about how they feel when they listen to music. You can have a student tell you why they don't like particular music. But all of it has to be done within certain guidelines. So students need to use appropriate vocabulary. This means it can't just say, this makes me feel icky. Students need to be able to articulate what it is about the piece of music that affects them in a certain way and develops a preference, whether for or against the piece of music. I would think the best way to do this would be to give students lists of words that they can draw from that would be appropriate vocabulary. There are more technical music terms that obviously would need to be put to play, but that would depend a lot on what the music was. But there's also just appropriate uses of adjectives and specific terminology that will help students do this appropriately. So to talk about tempo is going to be helpful. To talk about touch is going to be helpful. Is it staccato? Is it legato? Are there moments of marcato? And what does that do to the listener when they hear it? Or the student, because the student is the listener. One really fun lesson that could be done is to play a piece of music and have students write down a list of words that they think of or that they feel or are affected as they're listening to the piece of music. And then at the end of class, have everybody compile their lists and read it all out loud so that the class can hear their words thrown in with other words, see if anyone had double of the same thing, see if anyone had really different reactions to the same piece of music. Some of that could be just genuine personal reactions. Some of that could be someone didn't quite understand the intention of the music, or maybe was assigning their own personal bias towards something, but that's all part of the music listening experience, right? So that can be a really cool thing to do with the class. Middle school is such a turbulent time emotionally, and music is a great way for students to be in touch with how they're feeling, how they're affected by things, and start to develop vocabulary and the ability to hear themselves and present all of that going on internally to the world. If they miss out on this skill, they're going to have a rough time in high school. So the music classroom is a great way to start developing all of this. So it's your job as the teacher to give them that space. This one also is fun. Explore and compare various uses of music in daily experiences. So this can be very, very applicable to young middle schoolers because everyone listens to music in some way, in some form, at some point during their day. Whether it's on the radio at the grocery store, or in their car on Spotify every time they go anywhere, or maybe their mom plays music while they make breakfast, or countless ways. And everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different. So students should be able to discuss this pretty well. You could start out the lesson by asking, when is the last time yesterday night after you went home from school you heard music, and where was it? And some of the answers could be the examples I just gave, at the on the radio at Target as I was walking through, or something like that. And then you guys can talk through exactly why that music was used at that time. So at a shopping center, music is played to keep an upbeat and positive environment, right? That will encourage customers to keep walking and keep strolling and shopping and feel happy and enjoy the experience. Most of the time, they're playing pop songs that are just kind of fluff and fun and meant to make everyone feel like they're popular and cool. And so they'll keep buying things that make them feel that way as well. But probably most middle schoolers haven't thought through that before very much. So this would be a really great conversation to have. Get those gears turning.